Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Peitet. Today's Daf is sponsored by Erica Kolach in commemoration of the 5th yahrzeit of her mother, the Honorable Constance Gluby, Chaya Rachel Bat Shmuel. Connie shattered glass ceilings in the field of law in Canada throughout her life. Michelle was a scholar in residence at the Kent Mill Synagogue in Maryland in spring of 2016, while Erica was in Avelut, and I have been learning the Daf ever since. I wonder what my mother's reaction would be. And by Risa Tzohar, on loving memory of Esther Dina Bat Risa V'David on her 5th yahrzeit, and by Dina Hirschfeld Becker in memory of her mother, Serena Bialik Hirschfeld Zichrona Levracha, whose 13th yahrzeit is today. My mother told me that she was in the first class at Yeshiva Flatbush High School in which girls were allowed to learn Talmud, and her father was the teacher, Dr. Manoach Bialik Zichrona Levracha. Her memory is a blessing that is with me. And by Stuart Pilchowski, in loving memory of his mother, Fega Rachel Bat Yosef, a survivor of the Shoah, who would be so proud of her great-granddaughter, Tamima, for learning Daf Yomi. Okay, we're going to get started now. We're going to go back to the bottom of Pechet Amud Bet. In our discussion, what happened was we were discussing a Korban Shlamim that we were discussing a Korban Pesach, that a bunch of korbanot the hides of the korbanot got mixed up together, and we weren't sure whose belonged to who. And really, in general, it shouldn't make a difference. However, in this case, we found that there was a blemish on one of them. There was a wart, which makes it disqualified. So now what's the issue? The issue is that now one of them did not do a korban pesach. But the halacha that we saw said that it doesn't matter. None of them, they're all exempt from doing Pesach Sheni, to which the Gemara says, but one of them, right, let's start there. Va'ika, 5 lines from the bottom. Ha'ika chad lo nafik. There's one who didn't fulfill his obligation. So what are we supposed to do? How can we say they're all exempt from Pesach Sheni? To which the Gemara says, Mishum de lo efshar. We're stuck. We don't have a way to resolve this issue. Why not? So now we're going to go through a slew of, they're going to basically say, there's no way we could do this. And this is why. What are you suggesting we should do? If you're going to say everybody brings a korban pesach, 4 of those can't be a korban pesach, and now you're bringing something that can't be a sacrifice because it can't be a pesach, and you're bringing it to the azara. That's not allowed. You can't bring a non-sacrifice into the temple. Because 4 of them already fulfilled their obligation. What if it all together, they're only obligated in one Pesach, they go together, the 5 of them, and say, let's bring a korban Pesach together. What's the problem? The problem is Pesach can't be eaten for different people who are not signed up. Now, these people are signed up, but they're not really signed up because if they're not obligated in Pesach, then they can't be signed up here. So you can't do that. So hi, my. But then they say, wait, but that shouldn't be a problem. And I think it was Alana who just wrote this suggestion, which is, why doesn't everybody bring a Pesach to the temple on Pesach Sheni, 14th of Iyar? And let's just say, each of them, we bring it on under the following condition. And it's very common that people can bring sacrifices on condition and say the following. If mine was the blemished one, then the one I'm bringing now is the Pesach. And if mine wasn't the Baal Mum and mine was perfectly fine, the one that I'm bringing out, remember we learned that a Korban Pesach kind of morphs into a Korban Shlamim. They're really one and the same, although we're going to learn today they're not really one and the same, and we're going to have a list. Okay, in the context of this sugya, we're going to end up with a whole big list of differences between a Korban Pesach and a Korban Shlamim. So now they say, okay, so why don't we do this? And to this question, we're going to have a number of answers, and all of them are going to get rejected until the final one. Okay, we're going to keep trying to say why it doesn't make sense that one cannot bring it on this condition. Each time we'll say, no, you really could. That's really not such an issue. Eventually, we're going to have one answer as to why not. So the whole question really is, why can't they all bring under the condition, stipulate, if I need a Pesach, then this is my Pesach. If not, it's a Shlam. So the first answer is lo efshar. Why? Mishum de'ika chazev v'shok. The chazev v'shok, the breast and the thigh, go to the Kohen. De Kohanim hu da'achlele. And the problem is, they don't have Kohanim signed up for their, in other words, in a Korban Shlamim, you just give it to any Kohen. So the assumption here is they would just give it to any Kohen, but you can't do that with the Korban Pesach. It has to go to a Kohen who is also, by the way, you learn now that each had to have Anyone who did a Pesach had a Kohen signed up with them, it sounds like, or at least that's what it sounds like from the sugya. So they say, okay, fine. Why don't they all then, exactly like Tova's saying, bring a Kohen onto his sacrifice? Why not? That would resolve it. And then they'll have a Kohen who, if it's the Pesach, the Kohen's registered. Well, what's the problem? Hi Kohen Echidami, what kind of Kohen are they going to bring? Ida Avid Pesach, if the Kohen already fulfilled one's obligation in Pesach, Dilma Hai Pesachu. Maybe this is the Korban Pesach. Again, you can't just bring any Kohen. You have to bring a Kohen who's obligated in Korban Pesach. So if, let's say you brought a Kohen who wasn't obligated and yours ended up being the Pesach, then you're going to have someone who's not obligated for a Korban Pesach, and you can't have a Korban that's Ne'echal Shalom Minuyav. Again, you're having people that can't eat your Korban Pesach. That's a problem. V'idelo Abi Pesach. So, okay, find the Kohen who didn't do his Korban Pesach. What's the problem? Well, 4 people are bringing a Shlamim and not a Pesach. So now this Kohen's going to be stuck because Dilma Shlamimu, maybe the one that Kohen is eating is a Shlamim, V'lo Abi Pesach, and then that Kohen will never fulfill his obligation of Pesach. So that's not going to work either. But the Gemara eventually has a resolution, which is Nete kol chamisha chad kohen delo avid pesach v'nimni ilavei hani chamisha pesachim demiman avshach ikachad delo avid pesach v'kanavka bei. So they say no, really that's not a problem because they can each bring the same kohen, register that kohen, a kohen who didn't bring a korban pesach, register that kohen for all 5 sacrifices. The Kohen, a Shlamim, you don't have to register, so it doesn't really matter. The Kohen can obviously get the Chazeh V'Shok from them. And the Pesach will be used to help that Kohen fulfill his obligation. So that's not a good problem. In other words, we're trying to find a problem. Why didn't they do, right? Why didn't you do the stipulation? If the issue was Chazeh V'Shok, we have a way to resolve it. So it's not that. So let's try attempt number 2. Ela mishum dekamin ma'et ba'achilat shlamim. This is a topic that comes up in a number of sugyot, which is if you have a korban that can be eaten for longer and a korban that can be eaten for less time, right? Here we have the Pesach can only be eaten that night, which again, there's a debate until midnight or till the morning. The korban shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. So now you're basically saying, since maybe they're all Pesach, what's going to happen? If you leave it over till the morning, you're going to have to burn it. Now, we don't want to create a situation where we burn sacrificial items that don't necessarily need to be burnt. If it's a shlamim, then basically it's the wording of the Gemara in another place is you're meviyet ze lebeit hapsul. You're basically causing something to become pasul earlier than it normally would. And if we burn this, let's say the next day, when it's really a shlamim, that's not a good situation. We don't want to be burning sacrificial items that don't need to be burnt. So basically, we don't like that option. So that's why we can't make it a shlamim. So then they bring a next option. Why don't you say, v'nete motar pesach? Why don't you bring? So you're worried a shlamim can't be eaten, can be eaten longer than a pesach. But why don't we find something? It can be brought as a shlamim, but can only be eaten the same as a korban pesach in terms of the days. And what's that? Motar pesach. Motar pesach is generally when I designate an animal for my korban pesach. We've learned that it's designated at this point for korban pesach. Let's say I lose the animal and I can't find it. So I bring a different one in its stead. And then of course I find the animal later. That is called a motar pesach. It's pesach leftovers, so to speak. So now that is brought as a shlamim. We've already learned that it automatically defaults to a shlamim. And we're going to learn right now that even though it's brought as a shlamim, it can only be eaten like a korban pesach that night. So therefore, we will resolve our issue perfectly. Now, the question is, what does it mean to bring a motar pesach? Rashi says what it means is we create a situation where there's a motar pesach, which, it's a little bit unclear exactly how you would do this. Okay. In fact, Gefet this week in Hebrew, it's a short shiur on our website, is all about a machloket Rashi Tosfot to explain what on earth are they talking about, create a motar pesach situation. And it's very interesting, is it's all based on this other sugya in Menachot, where someone suggested, and they say that's ridiculous, you can't create a motar situation. And Rashi says that's exactly the same thing the Gemara suggests here. And Tosfot says, if it was so ridiculously knocked out in Menachot, there's no way it would be knocked out here. It would even be suggested here. It's like an interesting approach. Anyway, there's a whole debate exactly what the situation is of creating a motar, but somehow let's create a situation where there's a motar Pesach, and we'll say then the following. If mine is the blemished one, then it'll be, right, then this one will be the Pesach. Tamhu, this is the exact same thing we said before, right? This would just resolve your issue. If mine is fine, then this will be a shlamim. Now, if it's a shlamim, there's no problem of what we just said previously because motar Pesach nechal liyom v'layla echad, and then it's the exact same time frame. So that should work. But the Gemara rejects this, as I said before, and says, no way, you can't create a motar situation, right? There's no such thing. So the Gemara says, well, you don't like that. That's not what we meant. Or maybe it's what we meant, but let's come up with a better solution. Go search around. Now, it's not so simple, but find someone who's got motar Pesach. Now, in this case, you're going to have to find 5 people who have a motar Pesach because all 5 of them need to bring it. Find some 5 motar Pesachim that happen to have been left over and use them. And then you're totally fine. Then there's no difference and then it should work. So we're back to square one. Since this works, doesn't make any sense, why they wouldn't suggest doing this. Now you could say this might not be the most realistic situation. I don't know how common it was that people had these leftover animals from Pesach, but anyway, it's a possible solution. So they try another problem. And again, we're getting into differences. The first difference we saw was that the chazer v'shok by shlamim can go to any kohen, and the one on Pesach has to be part of your chabura. Number 2, we saw that the time frame of how long you get to eat them is different. Number 3, we're going to learn smicha. What's smicha? When you put your hands on the animal, okay, right? You put your weight onto the animal, which is not done in all korbanot. And now we're going to learn it was a difference. So they say, Elam mishum smicha. Dilu Pesach lo bai smicha. Ve'ilu motar bai smicha. The details of the sacrifice are different. Pesach, there's no smicha, and shlamim there is. So what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do smicha, not supposed to do smicha. So you can't bring this and do all the process of what we go through because they don't all need smicha, right? So the Pesach doesn't and the shlamim does. So they say, well, by the way, hatinach, that only makes sense to say that this is a difference in korban anashim, if it's men bringing the korban. But korban nashim, if it's women bringing it, ma'i kalamemar, what can you say then? If it's women, okay, which is interesting that they're suggesting this, that maybe our whole situation, you could have said, if the situation happened with only women, what's the difference women and men? It's one of the famous, that women don't, I'll tell you why it's famous in a minute, women don't have to do smicha on korbanot. The reason why it's famous, and the famous, I think it's famous sugya, I always like the sugya about, can women do mitzvot that they're not obligated in, or are they allowed to? And one of the sources is, there's a machloket about women somchot, is it reshut or chovan, and it talks about how women, even they wanted to do smicha and they were allowed to. And then there's a whole thing about that. It's one of the examples brought about how women can do things, they can opt into things they're not obligated in. But the fact is they're not obligated. Well, if they're not obligated, perfect. So if this happened with women, they could bring it either as a shlamim or as a pesach because they don't have to do smicha anyway on the shlamim. So it would be perfect. So therefore, they say that's a possible solution. Again, it's only a solution, just like the previous one was only a solution if you find 5 motarei pesach. This one's only a solution if it happens to be with women. So therefore, they go on and they say, still, we don't understand why we don't suggest the solution. So there must be some other problem. Ela mishum matanot. Matanot usually means gifts. It doesn't mean gifts in this case. Matanot means, this is the term they use for putting the blood on the altar. Okay, there's zrika, there's shpicha, right? And sometimes they call it matan, to put the blood on the altar. Now we're going to learn that Pesach and Shlamim have different rules about it. De'ilu Pesach matana achat. There's only one putting on the altar in one place. That's it. Ve'ilu Shlamim shtayim shein arba. In Shlamim, we have to do 2 placings of blood, which actually covers 4 corners of the altar, because you do one on one corner, and when you're in the corner, you get it on 2 sides, and one on the opposite corner on the diagonal, and then you get the other 2 sides. So you end up with blood on all 4 sides, but with only 2 puttings of the blood. Okay, I see, Gita, you're asking about Pesach Sheni. That's the daf for Shabbat. The whole deal about are women chayav in Pesach Rishon, even there's a question, and are women chayav in Pesach Sheni. Okay, so that's the whole question. This must be within the option that women are chayavot in both, which is actually the way we paskin. Okay, which Rabbi Yossi's opinion. We'll see it on daf tzadi aleph. Okay, moving on. So now, they say, so here you have it. Again, the difference is in the details. There's a problem with the details. You can't do, what are you going to do? You're going to do one, you're going to do two that are four, you're going to end up doing it incorrectly. So they say, who cares if you do it incorrectly? V'atnan, says in the Mishnah, all the ones that you put the blood on the outer altar, remember, not on the Mizbach HaKtorah. Remember, we learned there's ones that go inside, there's ones that go outside. The ones on the big, it's called the Mizbach HaNechoshet, the big altar there. That one, if you did it only in one place, even if you have to do it in more, it doesn't matter. It works. So therefore, just do it in one, like the Pesach, and you'll be Yotzei also for the Shlamim, and that's fine. So again, we have a possible solution. So why don't they suggest this? So they say, Ela Mishum, last difference, and the final one, it's the way you do it is different. Pesach, you pour the blood, and Shlamim, you throw the blood. So therefore, what are we supposed to do? How do we deal with the blood? If it's going to be either Pesach or Shlamim, we're stuck. So again, the Gemara says, right, you thought we'd have a solution because I told you this is the last one. But the Gemara says, "My nafkamina." Also there, Vahatanya, it says, if it's supposed to be thrown and you poured it, you're Yotzei. So why don't we just pour the blood and then we'll cover all our bases and that should be fine. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a good answer. Why not? In other words, it says di'evid, and if you did it already, it's okay. But it doesn't mean that you can go knowingly and say, listen, I know that maybe I'm supposed to do the zrika, but I'm going to just pour it. You can't do that. And therefore, we're stuck because you can't say if it's Pesach, if it's Shlamim, because you can't stand up from the beginning and say, I know I might be doing this wrong, but I'm going to do it wrong anyway. So therefore, because of that, they end up concluding that that must be the reason, which is very interesting because it's such a, kind of side point, but, and b'diavad it even works, but they say that must be the reason why we don't have, we don't do this, we don't let this option happen, and we basically say you're all exempt from Pesach Sheni. Okay? Tov. Oh, I want to go back to something I said yesterday about the king and queen. Someone had suggested after class that maybe the king was Agrippa, and there was Rabban Gamliel, the elder. So I wanted to just point that out because I didn't say that yesterday. He said there weren't kings and queens. Maybe it really was referring to King Agrippa, who comes up a lot in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, or Tanaitic sources. Okay, new Mishnah. We're going to have a lot of Mishnahs today. Ha'omer lebanav. We have a bunch of funny situations today, which you can see in the context of our regular lives, right? Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes the dapim are more relevant, sometimes less relevant. And, often we think korbanot, the Gemaras aren't going to be relevant. But as I mentioned a bunch of days ago about sacrifices and how the whole issue with sacrifices and all that is it's human interactions. There's so much human interaction relating around the sacrifices. Today, we're going to see a lot about the human element. Somebody says to his sons, I'm going to slaughter the Pesach. Who's going to be, he says to his kids, listen, I'll include whoever, okay, it's a way to get his kids going. Whoever comes first to Jerusalem, gets here first, you'll be included in my Pesach, which sounds like he's not including anybody else, just one of them. So let's see what happens. Right, it's like crossing the finish line. The first one gets the majority of his body and his head over the line. He gets it. Okay, now, Zacha b'chelko, what does he do? He gets his share. He gives his rights, like he shares them with his brothers. Now, it's not like only one of them gets the Korban Pesach and the rest of them aren't Minuyim. No, but he's the one who kind of gets it first, and then he gives his rights over to the other brothers. So the Gemara says, we're going to have a few questions on this. Shma mina yesh breira. Are you going to infer from here, like we asked on the previous two cases about the woman and the orphan, are you going to say that there's a concept of breira, which means, right, that when the father slaughtered his sacrifice, the sons hadn't gotten to Jerusalem yet, but he said, listen, I'm slaughtering it right now, and I'm going to include whichever one of you gets first to Jerusalem. I mean, he obviously didn't say right now, but he said, I'm going right now ahead of you. I'm going to slaughter it, and I'll have in mind which one of you gets first. Now, so does that mean yesh breira? He's the one who got in, but at the time of the slaughtering, he wasn't yet over the finish line. So does it mean that we can later go and predetermine and say, well, it was really known from then, even though it wasn't? So he didn't really mean this literally. He was just trying to motivate them, right? Parents or teachers or right? Anyone you're dealing with, you want to motivate them to do something. So you say something, you don't really mean it literally. He didn't mean, I'm only including the one who gets here first. He was trying to motivate them, get here first, and you'll at least be the first one to be zoche, and you can give the rights to the others. And therefore, and you can also see it, because if the father really only meant to include him, then the other brothers shouldn't be included at all. But yet it says, he brings in his brothers, so that means that that's really what the father intended. So again, the Gemara is going to now say it. If you're going to say he already appointed him from the beginning, Shapir, it makes sense. And when the father slaughtered you, he already had in mind all the sons, really. He knew they were all going to show up. It was just a matter of when they were going to get there. And he was just trying to motivate them. He was bribing them. And if you say he didn't, well, then after he slaughters it, you can't include other people that weren't included from the beginning. That's none. Don't we say in the Mishnah, which we're going to see in a minute, you can only change around. You have to be done basically by the time it's slaughtered. Shmamina. So from here, it seems that's clearly what the Mishnah meant. Tanya Namihachi, here's a braita to support that, and you're going to really like this braita. Ma'asevet kidmu banot labanim. There was a case where the daughters got there before the sons. V'nimtza banot zrizot ubanim shvalim. Okay, for all those statements about girls, and people say women, or derogatory about women, and they all come, right? People like to say, why is it derogatory about women? Nobody seems to complain about here. It's very derogatory against men, right? Those boys, they were lazy or low lives. The girls got here first. That's why you can see the situation, right? The boys are just sitting there lazing about. The girls are like, oh, let's go. Let's be on top of things. So anyway, there's a few things interesting. The first thing is, why did they bring this? Because they brought this to show it's just a matter of the father trying to encourage them. And here in the end, if the father's just trying to encourage, what's the bottom line that we want to know? Who won, so to speak, who was Zariz and who wasn't. So that's why this concludes they were Zrizot and they weren't. It doesn't conclude they became part of the sacrifice and they didn't, right? It just said they showed that they were more excited about the mitzvah than the boys were. It shows about girls doing the Korban Pesach, shows about the kids being involved, right? And the girls specifically, and being excited about doing the mitzvah. And it's a cute story. And, you always think about boys being quicker than girls in terms of faster speed. Here it seems maybe these girls were super fast. I was thinking of, I don't know if Free to be Yomi in Atalanta and racing like running like the wind. So kind of like that story. Okay, so cute story. We're going to see some other cute stories today as well. A little bit of a different type. Okay, new Mishnah. You can keep adding people, or at least that's what we think this means, as long as there's a kazayit for everybody. You can't add too many people and then you don't have a kazayit left. Now you can join and you can switch and go to a different group until what point? Until it's slaughtered. Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's not the time of slaughtering. It's the time of sprinkling the blood. You can still change until that point because, right, we always talk about sprinkling the blood as the main act of the korban. So first the Gemara is going to question my kamash malan. What's it telling you about this lolam nimnim ad shebu kazayit? We know you need a kazayit for everyone. What's it telling us? No, nothing new. Hakamash malan, it's coming to teach you. Again, they're going to explain it a little differently. Let's say all of us decided to go in a group together, and we go in a group and we're connected to one korban. And then we decide to switch before slaughtering. And we all leave that animal. Now you might have thought, what? We can leave, but at least one of us has to stay. In other words, we were originally connected to this animal. We can't just dump the animal and give it to someone else. One of us needs to still be there. So this Mishnah, apparently, according to the way the Gemara understands it, is telling you, la'olam, like for in any case, you can really, you can keep switching as long as what matters, only that we have at least a kazayit for everybody. That's the only thing that's important. So you don't need, if you want to switch, you can switch entirely. Now, what about this other machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon about, is it until shchita you can switch, or is it until zrika, until the sprinkling of the blood? So Amar Abai. Okay, so nimnim moshchim yidihem ad shishchet. That's just a quote from the Mishnah. Amar Abai, machloket limashech. The machloket between them is all about changing. The Rabbanit, and this issue about shchita and zrika is about changing, not about joining a group. Joining a group has to be done before slaughtering. but you can switch before the blood gets sprinkled. From, if you're already in a group, you could switch to a different group. Okay, we have to read the pasuk first to understand. The pasuk is Shmot Yubet pasuk Dalid. If the house doesn't have an animal, this is the pshat. Okay, if you don't have yima'et, like less than, you don't happen to have enough money to buy your own animal. You go find a neighbor and you go in together as a group. That's where we get all the laws about the group. All that. So he says the machloket. He understands this verse differently. Both of them. Yima'et means you kind of, it means to lessen, but it means you want to leave the group. Okay, if you want to leave a group, mihiyot miseh. So what do the rabbis say? You can only do it until you slaughter. Why? Mihiyot miseh mechayute deseh. Hey and chet often switch. So he reads it as mechayute when the seh is still alive. You can only do it, again, real drasha. It's not what the pshat of this pasuk is, but you can do it until the seh is no longer is alive. Once the seh is no longer alive, you can't change. Rabbi Shimon savar mehavayate deseh. From the actions of the seh. But what are the actions? It's the actions we do with the animal, which is until we get to the final action. Remember, there are actions after that, but they're much more minor. These are the major actions, and the last one is rika. So he understands it mehavayot deseh, from actions of the seh. So again, both understand that the subject is not really the subject, the pshat, but the subject of the drasha is we're talking about changing. Until what point can you change? Either mechayute deseh, while he's still alive, or mehavayute deseh, until you finish all the actions relating to it. Avali manot, but to start joining a group, divrei kol ad shishachet, everyone agrees it has to be because of the end of that verse. Right? It says, according to the number of people, v'hadar tachosu, and then it says tachosu, which we explained a while ago, is to slaughter. So this, it has to be that you have to join before the slaughtering. Tanya namihach, here's a bright to support this reading of Abaye. Nimnim u'moshchim et yideihem mimenu ad shishachet. In this source, not like our Mishnah, in this source, it's very clear that Rabbi Shimon distinguishes between nimnim has to be before shchita, even though in our Mishnah it sounds like everything can be before zrika. Here it says only until shchita, but changing could be until zrika. Now we get into another very interesting part of the page. Mishnah starts out and says, we have a group, we joined a group, and I decide I'm bringing someone else to join. Now, what rights do the other people in the group have? Because as soon as I add someone into the group, what happens? Everybody gets less meat. So imagine you invite me to a meal on Shabbat, and I show up with extra people. Okay, now it has to be that I added them before Shechita, obviously. But basically, I say I add someone to our Chabura without telling everybody. Okay, so I show up to your meal. I didn't tell you that I happen to have a few guests for Shabbat with me, and I bring them to the meal. Now, what rights do you have? Okay, so Risha'im menei Chabura litain lo et shelo v'hu ochel mishalo v'hem ochlim mishalahem. They can say to them, listen, yes, you were part of our group, but you know what? We're not very happy that you did this. We're going to give you your, let's say there's 10 of them. We're going to give you your 10th. Go eat that with your friends. You share your share. You want to add them? No problem. It's on your cheshbon, right? It's yours. You're responsible. We're not taking away anything from our share. Okay. And basically we do that. Okay. We can do that. So now the Gemara asks another question, which is even more interesting, I think. And now this seems like they're asking this question, not connected to our Gemara, but then they're going to bring 3 possible answers. And one of them is going to be from our Mishnah. So they ask the following question. B'nei Chabura, let's say you're sitting in a group of people with the Korban Pesach. Shaya yadav shelacha mehen yafot. It's like a nice way of saying it. What does it mean? He eats a lot and he eats quickly. And he starts taking more than his share, right? So here you have a guest at your table and they start eating a ton of food. And you're worried, right? Unless you're like a typical Jewish cook and you have enough food to go for way more people than you have. But let's say you don't. And you're worried that the food is going to run out. And you see this person eating a ton of food. So now in this case, it's the Korban Pesach. It's not just a regular, okay? We'll see soon they're going to actually talk about this in the context of a regular meal, okay? Not just a Korban Pesach. So Ma'ushi Amrulo Tolcha Kachavet say, can they say to him, listen, we're going to give you your portion. Sit over there. Right? I think about this when you either you go out to a restaurant with your family and you share meals, right? There's always people you don't really want to be sharing with, or particularly when it comes to dessert, because you know that they're going to eat quickly and they're going to eat it all and you're going to end up without anything, or unless you yourself hurry up and eat, which you don't like to do because you like to enjoy your food. So it's always a problem. Or you just have to get 2 plates and split it from the beginning, right? That's exactly what this is saying. You take your half of your chocolate souffle. I'm going to take my half and, we'll eat like that. So, now here's very fascinating. Can he say to them, ha kabiltun, look, you accepted me to your group. You got to deal with who you've got, sorry, but that's who I am. Odilma matzu l'meimar, or maybe they could matzu l'meimar le, they can say to him, ki kabilnan, why did we bring you to our chabura? This is very interesting. Litikune zvicha. We wanted your help. What does it mean we want your help? Well, the korban has to be eaten within a certain time frame. If you don't have enough people, you're not going to finish that big piece of meat. On the one hand, you don't have not have enough food. On the other hand, you don't have too much. Right? It's like when you eat a Shabbos meal in the 9 days. You don't want leftovers, right? Because what do you do with them? It's the 9 days. You can't eat meat. So here, we want you to help us finish it. And this is way worse than just that. There, okay, so throw it out. But here, you're going to burn sacrificial meat. We asked you to come to help, not to mess us up, and that we don't have enough food to eat. So let's figure out what the answer is. So we're going to bring a few sources to try to get to an answer. Tashma. Okay, so now. This is exactly our Mishnah, right? You have someone brings someone else on his part. Basically, you could say, go eat over there with your guests and we're going to eat ours. My time, is this not the same case, basically? We're worried he's going to eat too much, and that's why we say, go eat over there. Isn't it the same idea? If he's going to say, listen, you accepted me, tough luck if I eat too much. Now, right? The same thing you could say in our Mishnah, theoretically. You could say, listen, you accepted me. The fact that I have guests, you accepted me. You accept me with my guests. You do whatever I want. So Amre, look, de'ot no, those are not the same. One person eating too much food is not the same as someone showing up with extra guests. Why not? In other words, what's the issue here? When you decide who you're inviting for a meal, right? Sometimes someone says, I'm bringing some guests, and you think, that wasn't really what I had in mind. Like I kind of wanted to have a nice private conversation with my good friends, and now they're bringing guests that I don't know, and what kind of conversation are we going to have, and how's it going to go? And you're a little uncomfortable. Usually you won't say no, but theoretically you might want to. So here they say that's why these cases aren't comparable. It's not only about the amount of food that they're going to eat. It's also about the conversation at the table and the discomfort. We don't want some stranger that we don't know eating in our chabura on Pesach night. That's not what we're interested in, right? It's interesting because Pesach night is this night. We all try to say invite everybody, and but this is saying, right, you don't necessarily want that. So anyway, so that's why, right? You can imagine, right? There's houses I know where this happens where one spouse will invite people off the street, and the other person's like, why didn't you tell me? One time I remember I was in the house Friday night. I didn't go to shul, and my husband comes home from shul with a bunch of people. Like, oh, whoops, I didn't realize that was happening, right? Definitely happened a bunch of times. You get used to it and you deal with it, but it's sometimes like, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting for my meal. Okay, so now, so therefore, those aren't comparable cases. We can't learn it from there. Let's try another source. Tashma. Remember this case? The guy was nibbling in the kitchen, the servant working there, but he was also part of the meal. So he now is stuck eating there. He can't eat in the chabura. So if he's smart, he fills up in the kitchen. If the people wanted to be nice to him, what would they do? They'll sit next to him, right? They'll come into the kitchen and they'll eat. Yeah, that's a divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And what do they derive from here? Ratzu in, lo ratzu lo. It sounds like only if they want to. They don't have to. Now, amai. Nemalahu. Now it's not exactly comparable, but they say, again, he could say to them, Ha kabiltu, look, you accepted me to be your shamash. You got to deal with me. Now that I ate in the kitchen, you have to come and eat with me. And you see that they don't say that. So we obviously can't use this kabiltu. Look, you took me, and so what if I eat more food? It's your fault. So they say no, those aren't comparable. Shane hatam, why? They could say to him, Ki kabilnach adat hadenitrachach kaman limitrachal didach lo kabilinach. We accepted you. Why do we accept you? You're a shamash. You're supposed to be working for us. You're supposed to put yourself out for us. That's why we hired you here. And yes, we're including you in our chabura because we know you need a place to eat, but we hired you to help us. Not that we have to now work and move our spot and go sit and eat in the kitchen because you messed up. No, you were a hired person for the purposes of making it easier for us, not making it more difficult for us. So therefore, they don't have to. Okay, next source, Tashma, and now this is classic, where now we're going to have a source that says exactly our case, a Braita. So why didn't they bring this in the first place? They probably didn't know of its existence till they brought all the others, and now they bring the obvious one. We're going to have a clear answer. Exactly the case we're looking for. One person was eating too much. They could say, take your portion and leave. And all the more so, and I told you we get to this, you have 5 people and they're eating a regular meal. Okay, so now they say you can tell him, take your portion and go. Okay, so now you see, even in a regular meal, if someone's eating too much, if you really want to, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could basically say to them, thanks, but no thanks. Here's the part I prepared for you. Go eat this somewhere else. Shma mina. So from here, you see that clearly you can do this, both in a chabura and even outside. So now the Gemara is going to ask, Mai velo od, why do you bring this other case? So they say, lo mebaya kama. It's a lo mebaya structure, which means not only this, but even this. Lo mebaya pesach, de matze ambre le ki kabel nilch litikune zvicha. You might have thought maybe we only say it in Pesach because there we said we brought you to the meal to help us, remember, to help us get rid of the meat so we don't have no problem. And here you're messing it up for us. But afilu sibolet nami ditzavta ba'almahu, where you're just getting together to be together with people. Okay, there you weren't bringing him to help you. You were just bringing him to be together. You can still basically kick your guest out. Okay, that was all. We started the top of this Amud with this one question, right? We had the mission, then we had this one question. We tried to prove from our mission. We didn't. In the end, we bring a source where we can prove it. Now they say, some people say that wasn't actually the question they asked. That wasn't what they asked. This was their question. B'nei chabura, much simpler and less interesting question. B'nei chabura reshe'in l'chalek or ein reshe'in l'chalek. When you sit down to eat your korban pesach, and I know people have been asking about how exactly did this whole thing work? How did it go about? What was the reality? Okay, which I'll say right away, we don't really know the reality. It's very hard to come up with the real reality of how all this happened. Till today, we're learning certain details and certain things that went on. How many people came on Aliyah L'Regel, right? Probably not the majority of the people, even though the Gemara kind of told that story that was very exaggerated about how many millions of people were there, right? It seems not a lot of people. It seems they probably split up their families. A lot of the women weren't coming. I mean, we did see today that the girls were coming. So in certain cases, I'm sure that did happen. But overall, it seems like it was probably men. Their Seder and their Pesach were very different than ours because it wasn't all mishpachot. Maybe the way the Torah sets it up, it almost sounds like everyone's kind of there and their families. But families could mean, the males of their families. And likely a lot of the people didn't actually come in Aliyah L'Regel. But here we're going to say, here they're asking a basic question about how did they divide up the food? Did they put the meat in the middle and everybody takes a portion? Or are they allowed to, if they want, split it from the beginning, right? Like plated. Okay, you go to an event and they plate your meal. Everybody gets one portion, exactly equal portion, or reasonably equal as you can make it. So are they allowed to do that or not? So that's what it means. Risha'in l'chalek o ein risha'in. Or do they have to put it in the middle of the table and just let people take? So Tashma, they say, let's learn it from this source we just saw. Which seems to imply only yadav yafot in, ein yadav yafot lo. The only way you could say to someone, take your portion, is if, right now we think of plating as like a nice fancy thing. They think of it as insulting. Like, no, leave the food in the middle and everybody takes. And only if there's one person who's really taking too much, then we say, here, you take your portion. But it seems clear that otherwise they just had the food in the middle. And therefore, it sounds like you really can't do that. Shma mina. Okay, now we get to a fun story. Rav Papa Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua Arivu Rifta Bahade Hadadi. They were eating bread together. It sounds like a regular meal. Ad Acha Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua Chada. While he was eating one portion, Acha Rav Papa Arba. He ate 4 portions. Now, when you have 2 rabbis sitting together and the following thing happens, what do you think is going to ensue? A halachic discussion about this. So, Amarle Plagli, he says, split your food with me. Don't eat so much more. I want to have, split it up. Amarle, kabiltun. He says to him, you accepted me to eat with you. I'm going to eat the way I want to eat. Ejive kolhani tiyuvta. He's brought up all the sources that we brought up and said, look, you can't do this. And shane kedishanina. But if you notice, most of the sources we said, oh no, that's unique to Pesach. That's unique to this. So we answered him, that's unique to this. That's not relevant to me. Ejive b'nei chabura. But then he brings the last source, the b'nei chabura source, which proved if someone's eating too much, it's really a problem. But Amarle, hatem da amre kikabalimiuch liziktikun izvich. He says, oh, that's just by Korban Pesach because you invited the guy to help you. And now he's messing you up. But in a regular meal, no. To which Rav Huda Bred Rav Yoshua said, Etive Sibole. Clearly he knew his stuff. He said, no, it also says in that source about a regular meal. Plagle. So basically Rav Papa conceded and gave him his portion. Story gets more interesting. Azal Ariv Bahade Ravina. Now he goes and eats with Ravina. Ada Acha Rav Huda Bred Rav Yoshua Chada. While he was eating one portion, obviously he must have been a slow eater. Acha Ravina Timnaya. Ravina ate 8 times the amount of food. Now, right, it was bad enough with Rav Papa. Now he gets to Ravina, who's eating double the speed of Rav Papa. Amal, mea pape velo chade Ravina. I'd rather have 100 Rav Papas than one Ravina. And, thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm going to eat with you again. Okay, so interesting stories here. I want to remember Ravina. I think Ravina is the one who says about Lechem Mishnah and about you shouldn't have a whole loaf because it looks like you're a Rav Tanuta, like you're eating piggishly. I think it might be him, and it's interesting. I don't know. I have to look back at that. Okay, so that's basically where we got to now. So that's our stories about this whole thing. Okay, now we're going to continue on with this Braita. Tano Rabbanan. Okay, now we're talking about a whole different topic. Someone invites people to eat on his Pesach and on his Chagiga, because remember they ate Chagiga that night. The money in his hand that he gets, okay, I was thinking like pay box, right? So I have a group, right? We're collecting money. So, I don't know what the parallel is in America, but everyone Zeli or all these other things, right? You open a group and everybody gives money to the group. So now what's the status of all that money? So that money becomes chulin because it was used to buy the Pesach. The Gemara is going to talk about not exactly because he already bought the Pesach and now this is the money to reimburse him. And there's a little bit of an issue with the hekdesh and all that. We'll get into that tomorrow because it doesn't come up yet today. If I have an animal for an ola or shlamim that I designate for myself, I can't sell it to anyone. Okay, it's mine. So if I sell it, it's useless. It's not a sale. And whatever money I got for it, since you bought it for a sacrifice, I have to take that money and I have to put it in the temple. We're going to see this in Shkalim. There was a place where they would put money. And all that money went to Olot Nidavad, they're called Ketz HaMizbeach, where when they wanted the altar to always be working, so they would bring Korbanot Olah when the altar wasn't working, and that money would go to that. Okay, it's like undesignated money for sacrifices. So now they say, but if we just said it wasn't a valid sale, then why does the money have to go to Nidavad? The money should just go back. Amarava Knasa. Say we're penalizing you. Because you did this, we're penalizing you, and basically you shouldn't be doing this, and therefore it's a penalty. Umay kol shehen. What's this kol shehen? Kol shehen. Any money. Even if they overpaid. Okay, let's say they were only worth 4 and they paid 5. They even penalize them on the entire value. So they basically get penalized, and their money goes to the temple, and they don't get their money back. Okay, we'll stop here for today, and then we'll get into this whole question about why is the money chulin and what works and how does that whole thing work? So we'll get into that tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone. And, we can only sort of dream about this whole issue with having guests and too many guests and all that. But at some point, we'll go back to that, and these sugyot might become more relevant. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Although hopefully, be careful with your etiquette, whether you really want to behave the way the Gemara says you can.